My name is George Bush, 28th Land Commissioner for the great state of Texas. My role with FREOPP is I hold the title of Senior Research Fellow. So I know Benji's a visiting fellow, so I'm going to invoke my rank and authority this morning as the Senior Research Fellow at FREOPP. Along with Ovik, I'm based in Austin, so I think I'm one of the few Texans that will be joining you during the conference. And so delighted to bring a Texan perspective on a big issue, which is energy reform and how we can lead as a country on issues such as energy independence. Wanted to go through some ground rules before we get started. Since we only have about 45 minutes together, I'm going to ask for you to review the bios of our distinguished panelists in the materials that were provided to you in registration. And then we'll set aside 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A after we work through these questions on our panel. This session is going to explore how free market principles can address today's climate issues and energy challenges that face our country's economic growth. Our experts are going to discuss innovative strategies to reduce carbon emissions, promote energy independence, and create opportunities for prosperity, including all Americans. And with that, let's get started. We're joined this morning by Benji Backer, co-founder of American Conservation Coalition, Drew Bond, co-founder of Perryfield Energy, and Rod Richardson, who holds many titles, but I'll stick to one, and that is co-founder of the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. So I need to state at the outset that one of FREOPP's initial objectives is to address the needs of lower-income Americans. And as we know, energy is the largest line item in many low-income household budgets. In 2012, a study by the U.S. Energy Information Administration found that the average residential cost of electricity in 2022 rose more than any other year since record-keeping has been made by our government, rising by over 14.3% in 2022. And so the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel is that with 23 estimates needing, with our country needing over 10% more of retail power, how do we use market forces to stabilize our grid while lowering costs that are killing everyday budgets? So, Drew, we'll start with you since you're near me.
All right. Well, thank you, George. Is this mic on? You can hear me okay? Can I just say free markets and drop the mic and walk out the door?
That's acceptable.
No, I mean, look, we know we need more energy, and we need it to be abundant. We need it to be cleaner and cleaner over time. We need it to be affordable. You get that through competition. You get that through freer markets. One of the challenges is that energy is not totally in a free market, right? I mean, we are in competition globally with other countries that actually subsidize their own energy, and so that is a real challenge in terms of our competing with those countries and competing with countries like OPEC. But ultimately, the best path forward is not to try and emulate them. It's actually to really try and reduce barriers for innovation to happen. And we've seen that happen in our lifetime. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see us not be dependent on the Middle East for oil. And lo and behold, innovation made it happen, right? Innovation of entrepreneurs, innovation of technology, the capital markets that move freely within the United States and around the world opened up what we have come to know as the fracking revolution, right? The innovation that happened in that space completely transformed the geopolitical situation, not only our energy security, but we are no longer reliant on the Middle East for our oil. So that's the good news. The challenge is we've become more and more reliant on China for our minerals and mining and processing. And you can blame renewables, but we need minerals and mining and processing for a lot of other forms of technology. So I think there's some real challenges that lie ahead, but I am an eternal optimist. I truly believe that economic freedom, freer markets are the answer. We don't need more subsidies, right? Subsidies ultimately distort markets and increase costs for consumers. A lot of the different mechanisms that have been thrown out there that big corporations tend to like hurt small corporations because they can't absorb those costs. So I'm just someone that ultimately believes in freer and freer markets over time, more and more competition. Innovation will win the day, but we've got to let it happen in a way that's not top down, but bottom up.
Rod?
Yeah, I would like to build on what Drew has said, because he pointed out that it's innovation in fracking and things like that. Well, that innovation actually didn't just happen. That happened because of solid free market policy reforms back in the Reagan era. Okay, prior to Reagan, natural gas had been a heavily regulated, enterprise controlled by the monopoly power sectors in this country with price caps. Independent producers could not hook up to the power to the gas lines, and if they did, they were subject to price controls that made it just economically unappealing. By removing that layer of regulation, Reagan opened up that market to the innovation that happened. And it wasn't just that. Opening up that market was the first crack in the in the monopoly control of that area, which led to the power market deregulation of the 1990s. Those two free market reforms led to solving the acid rain problem, and they also led to the fracking revolution. So it's double down. It is free market policies that allow the innovation to happen. There's a very good study by Wayne Weingarten at the Pacific Research Institute, where he compared the power markets in the United States that are competitive versus the ones that stayed regulated. The power markets that are competitive not only are reducing prices faster than the monopoly power markets, which are rate-based and just, whatever they spend on infrastructure, they just bill to the customers. They don't have any incentive to control their costs. So obviously there's an economic advantage to competition. But those competitive power markets, surprisingly, are also decarbonizing 66% faster than the uncompetitive markets. Like it or not, free market policies are basically decarbonizing. And it's important to understand that, when we tackle, problems like climate change, which are real problems that need to be dealt with, the right way to do it is not through subsidies, but through freer markets, free trade. Free trade is one of the, major reasons we have, increased energy costs. Is the tariff wars that we've engaged in have led to a massive increase in prices of steel and things like that, which are causing all these energy projects to just be much more expensive. So free trade, competition, all these things. If you want to bring down prices, you have to make your markets freer.
Benji?
Good morning. I couldn't agree more with what was said already, but I also think I want to paint a picture of kind of two examples and kind of the two paths we can go down. So, there's the way that California has handled energy, and there's the way that Texas has handled energy. And one would be lauded by the climate change activists as the answer, and one would not. But the reality is the other one is making more progress when it comes to clean energy development and fighting climate change than the other, and it's not what people would think. So California decided to take the regulatory first approach. Markets are not good. The markets are going to ruin the environment. So we're going to shut down natural gas and nuclear in our state. And the result of that is that they actually use just as much fossil fuels as they did before, but they're importing it from other countries that don't have environmental standards. And they are importing almost all of it from overseas, from countries like Ecuador, Venezuela, Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Not exactly the countries you want to trust when it comes to environmental protection. And so their emissions not only have gone up in the state inside their own borders, but they've also gone up around the world because of a regulatory first approach. They're trying to dictate the way that people use energy, but the reality is the demand is the demand. You have to meet people's energy demand. And so they're raising prices on everyone, but emissions are also going up. Then you look at a state like Texas, which is number one in wind and solar. It's number one in oil and gas, and energy prices are low. Emissions are staying pretty steady or going down. And you have I mean, even just yesterday, a big investment from the governor into nuclear power, and really trying to get that happening from the innovation side of things. And so it's not a black and white, regulation is, or that, like, we're not going to have completely free markets in this country on energy. I think we have to, like, acknowledge that, there's going to be subsidies that have happened over decades. There's utilities. There's all these different things already dictating the marketplace. But when you use an innovation first, market first approach, you actually get lower energy prices and lower carbon emissions. And that's why, I mean, even what C3 Solutions has put out shows that if you have less barriers to entry, if you have a more free market, you have less emissions around the world. The countries that are reducing emissions are growing their economies the fastest. And I think that that's where we need to tip this issue on its head, because for so long we've been told that regulations are going to solve environmental challenges. Regulations are going to solve climate change, when in reality, it's the opposite.
Thank you for that, Benji. I'll come back at you on the role of coal. What do we do with coal? Coal provides about 1/3 of the world's electricity, much of that in developing countries, which many argue is necessary for economic growth. However, coal does release more carbon per unit of energy than burning oil, and particularly natural gas, accounting for 41% of the entire world's greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. So I guess that would be the first part of the question. Second, when we talk about India and China and their coal-related emissions, are there international frameworks that the new administration needs to consider from an enforceability and accountability standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of coal for many reasons. I mean, in a country like the United States, at least, it's not economical, at least right now. But with the increased demand for energy, it's possible that you might have to see coal plants come out. In Arizona, where I live, they're talking about bringing coal plants back online because they don't have enough energy to meet the data centers, which is a really scary proposition because they don't really have a plan for that. And it also is not economical at all. So I think one of the most screwed up things America can do, though, is try to tell other countries what energy sources they can and can't use, right? Telling them that they can't use coal when they're trying to innovate or develop to innovate like we did, 150 years ago. That's something that we just don't have the right to dictate. So we have to be realistic about the fact that some countries are going to use the energy source that's the cheapest for them to be able to grow their economies and grow their society in the way that America did. And so our role should be showing them that you can use other energy sources that are actually more cost effective. The only way to do that is through innovation and markets. Like, the only way to drive down costs is through new technology and innovation. And the only way to replace coal is to do that. So the United States has that opportunity from a leadership standpoint, and to export those technologies around the world, which is why I'm so excited about this next generation of nuclear technology, for example, because if you could decrease the cost, especially the startup cost, nuclear is actually not that expensive over the lifespan of a nuclear plant, but you're paying a lot at the beginning that a lot of people don't want to pay for. So if you can decrease that cost, countries would adopt nuclear overnight, but the problem is it's more expensive than coal right now. So our job should be, how do we replace coal, not in telling people what to do, but actually how do we make their lives better by decreasing the cost of energy on some of the sources that might be cleaner and actually better for humanity too, because there's also some humanitarian problems with coal too.
Rod, you spent a lot of time abroad. Any thoughts on international frameworks?
Yes, I am the co-chair of something called the Climate and Freedom International Coalition meeting, which I run in conjunction with Tholos Foundation, part of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover was here yesterday, so they're a great partner. We have free market think tanks around the world that have, over the last 2 years, while this coalition's been in existence, started to collaborate together, coming together in workshops at various conferences around the world to think about these issues. When these groups got together, one of the big questions, since we were an international group of free market think tanks, was what is the replacement for these, sort of left-tilting frameworks, international frameworks like the Paris Agreement and the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a carbon tariff that is threatening to screw up world trade with protectionist barriers everywhere. So this group developed you asked about an international framework. They developed a international free market agreement on climate and sustainable development called the Climate and Freedom Accord. And basically, This is a free world, free trade club where nations are signing up for free trade competition behind their borders in power markets and stuff like that to allow innovators in, and property rights, rule of law, democratic governance of your economy. And you're also signing up for one of the reasons why you would do this is some very innovative new kinds of supply side tax cuts, internationalizable supply side tax cuts that reduce the cost of new investment. And this is incredibly important. I don't know if you guys heard Daniel Bunn talking about the importance of full expensing. Full expensing, reduces the cost of new investment by letting people when they make an investment, instead of expensing it over 30 years, expense it over 1 year. You get your tax money back faster. It liberates internal capital. It basically makes the cost of new investment cheaper. When you do that, if you make the cost of new investment cheaper, you introduce a bias in the system for investing in the latest, cleanest, newest, most efficient technology faster. You literally speed up the energy transition. So this is a key policy, and all free market policies really do this. Free trade does it, competition does it, these tax policies do it. But full expensing only does that for internal capital in the company. It frees up their cash flow. To liberate external capital, the Climate and Freedom Accord recommends something called rapid innovation funds. This is tax-exempt debt for property, plant, and equipment, basically, and some of the labor expenses as well that go into this. So you can reduce the cost of capital. When capitalists need to raise money for a project, right, they go to the capital markets, the debt markets, because debt is cheaper than equity, right? So if you give them tax-exempt debt, it reduces the cost of capital by about 30%. And you can make this, the thing about debt, which you can't do with any other tax cut, is you can make this internationalizable, internationally reciprocal, in the sense that investors in one country can raise money, tax-exempt debt, use it for individual projects or pool it into funds and invest it across borders to lower the cost of new investment. So the countries that line up for this, they get reduced cost capital for infrastructure development. So you're making it very enticing. So instead of having a barrier, a negative incentive punishment barrier of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, you're having a positive incentive. So there are two new studies that groups of our coalition just came out with. Hallie has them. You can grab that or take a photograph of what those are. But the Institute for Free Trade, some of you might know the name Dan Hannan, and the UK Growth Commission teamed up for a series of studies. They modeled the GDP impact of the carbon border adjustment mechanism on the UK versus the Climate and Freedom Accord. The carbon border adjustment mechanism decreases GDP by about 650 pounds per person per year. That's an economic loss to everybody in the UK. The Climate and Freedom Accord increases GDP by over 1,000 pounds per person per year, right? And that compounds over time. So that is, you could attack climate change with an economic loss, or you can attack it with something that lowers costs and raises GDP. What do you want to do?
Thank you for that, Rod. We need to get you in front of Secretary Rubio once he gets out.
Well, I'll tell you, all of these ideas, these studies were, for the UK, but they could be certainly adapted. New studies could be done for the US using the same kind of economic modeling versus the IRA. What this would do for trade. I mean, basically, this isn't just a climate policy that costs money. This is a climate policy that delivers an additional layer of supply side tax cuts. So it is more free market than doing nothing.
Drew?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that, when we talk about climate policy, one of the primary reasons that my organization started, C3 Solutions, which stands for the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions, is because for the longest time, all we heard was the sky's falling because of climate. The government needs to step in and fix it. Well, A, I don't believe the sky is falling because of climate. I do believe climate's a serious issue. But B, I certainly don't think that the government is going to come in and fix it. I mean, we know from experience that, government fixing things oftentimes creates worse problems. And so when we founded the organization, Benji, referenced it. One of the first publications that we produced, which we've now produced 3 years running, is called Free Economies Are Clean Economies. And what Free Economies Are Clean Economies does is what you already instinctively know, but we back up with data. It shows how economic freedom leads to a cleaner environment. And not just based on, pick your data. We've got data sets from the Heritage Foundation and a number of other indices like the Fraser Index and the Freedom Index, and there's a whole pool of indices there that mark economic freedom around the world. Then we've got data from the Environmental Performance Index from Yale and, world other indices. Like there's a whole basket of indices out there. No matter which one you pick, the outcome is always the same. More economic freedom leads to a cleaner and cleaner environment, less emissions, less pollution. And we know this, right? I mean, if you're able to feed your family, then you can then think about, well, how can I make my living situation cleaner? If feeding my family and starving is my number one priority for the day, I don't have the luxury of thinking about how do I keep things clean around me. So when we think about the developing world and we think about the global situation around emissions and pollution and the environment, we would argue that the best thing that's happened for economic freedom in a long time is the focus on climate. Because what it forces you to do is realize that there's such a thing as good climate policy and bad climate policy. Benji talked about the bad climate policy that California has and the good climate policy that Texas has implemented. We can look to Germany, and we know exactly what's happened there. That's bad climate policy, right? They got off of nuclear, they got off of coal, they got on Russian natural gas, created a vacuum, Putin invaded, and their hands were tied. That's bad climate policy. So the best climate policy, the best thing we can do for the environment is actually help people rise out of poverty and do it in a way that gives them access to affordable, abundant energy. And we know that energy over time becomes cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And so the race is on right now for who's going to own that clean energy economy, so to speak. And we view the world pretty broadly when we think clean. It includes natural gas, it includes nuclear, it includes solar, wind, geothermal. I'm actually pro coal. If nothing else, I think because the United States is the Saudi Arabia of coal in terms of our resources, I don't want to just leave them in the ground, never to be touched again. I'd at least like to have it as our strategic coal reserve in the case that we need it. So again, I want options, but I know that over time, competition will force innovation and force things to be cleaner and cleaner and cleaner over time. So, the things that Benji's talking about, the things that Rod is talking about at an international perspective, we're living in a world where China is eating our lunch in terms of the mining and minerals and processing, and they're eating our lunch in terms of the investments that they're making in the developing world. And literally in our own backyard in South America, if you just pull up the map of Latin America and where China's making major investments, they are owning this supply chain, and we've got to do something different about it. And one of the things that we do different about it is we've got to go all in on free trade agreements with our allies, reducing barriers. We need to, lock arms with our allies. Getting into a trade war with China isn't necessarily going to help matters. The reality is we're already in a trade war with China. I don't know that we need to elevate it anymore. I just want to be stronger with our friends.
May I add to that a little bit? There is no such thing as a state or national solution for climate. This is actually a global issue. You can't do anything in just one country. You actually, because free markets are the key, you actually need an international free market framework that encourages all nations to join into free markets, right? And so this kind of a framework the Climate and Freedom Accord, it basically suggests a solution, but it's not just a solution for climate. It's also a solution for things like the migration crisis. We had a lot of panels talking here about migration and what to do about the border, but the real cause of the migration crisis is dysfunctional governments south of the border, in Latin America and North Africa, Middle East. That's what's causing these massive, we have to figure out ways to encourage these nations to rise up and modernize and become, free economies. So this will have multiple benefits beyond just climate and energy.
Appreciate
by the way, I wanted to say, if anybody wants to join the Climate and Freedom Coalition meeting, we have one on next Thursday, December 19th. Just give your email to Hallie, and we'll add you to the list if you would like to join in.
Appreciate that. Benji touched on a really interesting area of energy, and that's a potential nuclear renaissance. FREOPP has Grant Deaver, who's our energy fellow, write about regulatory reforms extensively. And his research has shown that the current process to approve a new nuclear power plant design costs in excess of $50 million just for the front end diligence. We actually, as part of this panel, welcomed Brett Kugelmass, who unfortunately is in Germany, helping with their nuclear renaissance as well. And he designs SMR, small modified reactors, either behind the meter for data centers or for generation to traditional grids. And so we just wanted to hear from the panel in terms of your thoughts, and not necessarily in terms of the bureaucratic reforms that we can recommend to, say, FERC and to NERC, but just culturally, what does it take to get Americans convinced socially about having a carbon-free option as part of our base load? And perhaps it's a new generation of leadership for a reset in terms of how we think about nuclear energy. Drew, did you want to start on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Benji can speak to the new generation of leadership better than I can, but I think the small modular reactors is an exciting kind of forefront of the technology. You see day after day after day new partnerships with, you've got Google partnering with Kairos, you've got X Energy partnering with Dow Chemical, you've got Oklo partnering with, companies like Diamondback Energy, all around, how do you deploy small modular reactors in a way that suits the exponential growth of the data revolution globally. And that's actually a really great opportunity because, frankly, small modular reactors in the U.S., while there's been a lot of hype about it, and there's, something like 80 or 90 companies that are working on this, we've deployed 0 in the United States. I think there's like 3 globally, 1 China, 1 Russia, 1 Japan. So the reason that we've deployed 0 in the United States is not because the technology isn't there, it's because of the regulatory framework. The Nuclear, Regulatory Commission cannot get out of its own way. And Congress tried to fix this recently with the Advance Act. The Advance Act, among other things, changes the mission statement of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to, hopefully help it take on a little bit more risk. But the reality is the world is in a race right now for, deploying this technology and owning the supply chain. And the United States' regulatory framework is actually stopping us. It's hurting us globally. So, with the small modular reactors, they couldn't hook up to the grid because many of these, regional grid operators just take way too long to get anything done and get to yes on these things. So now these partnerships with, the Microsofts and the Googles and the, even the natural gas, companies like Diamondback and X Energy with Dow Chemical, those are perfect kind of co-located opportunities where you've got a really heavy power load and you've got a really dense power provider in a small modular reactor. And, I'm telling the audience what they already know, but, modular reactors could be as small as a shipping container. And in the case of Oklo, they are, and just literally buried beneath the ground. And then they put a really kind of pretty architectural structure over it. or it could be, as big as, I don't know, 3 or 4 houses or something. Not as big as like the Vogel one that we've opened in Georgia. But this has been a real challenge. The Vogel one in Georgia, I think the initial budget was $14 billion. It came in at $30 billion. It took 7 years longer to build. It wasn't because of the technology. I think hopefully the newly elected Trump administration that, likes to break things, maybe they can break the regulatory framework in a way that's actually good for nuclear.
Yeah, what we're doing right now on energy and environmental policy is just not sustainable. And I'm not just talking about like the environment. It's also just not sustainable from an economic or national security perspective. I was 7,000 feet below the ground at a copper mine last week, which is my idea of fun somehow. And they've been waiting for 15 years for the federal government to approve the permitting for this copper mine. And right now we have actually a global copper shortage. For those of you who don't know, copper is like the #1 mineral used in all vehicles, solar, wind, nuclear, hydropower. It's critical to pretty much everything that we do. And it's also one of the main minerals used in our homes. So we have 25% of the world's supply at this mine, and we're waiting for the federal government to approve it. The company and their staff are just waiting, right? Like they have zero consistency or ability to understand how they're going to move forward with this mine because they're just waiting for the government to approve it. And Trump approved it, then Biden unapproved it. And if Harris had won, they probably would never open this mine, to be honest, because at some point you have to cut your losses and say, we've spent billions of dollars on this and we can't fork over more cash to keep waiting. That's the way that the government's handling our conversation around energy and the environment. And meanwhile, we take 15 years to build a nuclear plant. That's not because nuclear plants are that difficult to build. They are difficult to build, but France and UAE and China are building them in 5 to 7 years. We built one in Wisconsin, where I grew up, in about 6 years, a few decades ago. So we are preventing ourselves about a decade of process on nuclear, and then on mining, it's like 15, 20 years. And of course we should have standards, but we're giving away all the keys to China, and they're building more nuclear, they're building more solar, they're building more wind. They actually are building more nuclear plants in China right now than we have total in America, and they're currently constructing those. So they aren't thinking about those things. And we should think about, making sure that we have the right environmental safeguards and community safeguards, but we're going way too far, and the government is preventing us from actually making progress on these things. So I think where the Republicans and in power now can maybe help move the needle is saying, hey, we don't want to pick winners and losers in the energy space. We want to get out of the way and allow America to build. We want America to innovate, and we want to be able to show the world what we can do. Some things are going to work and some things aren't. Out of the 60 next generation nuclear companies, some of them are doomed to fail. But a lot of them are going to succeed. And you look at like what's really exciting about this opportunity is the way that it can pair both sides. You have in Wyoming, you had Bill Gates, prominent Democrat, donor, liberal guy, working with their Republican governor and Republican legislature to basically build the next generation of nuclear in the state. They broke ground on their first facility, and it is something that's actually replacing 2,000 jobs that were just lost by a coal plant closing. And so you're replacing jobs. You have liberals and conservatives working together, and somehow they've been able to succeed without the government getting out of the way. Imagine what they can do if the government just got out of the freaking way.
So a couple of points about nuclear. From a free market perspective, if you're an advocate for free markets, right, it is not your job to champion a particular technology or demonize a particular technology. All technologies deserve a chance to go forward and succeed and innovate and get better. So I do want to caution people who consider themselves advocates for free markets, that some of the people who are advocating for nuclear are not champions of free markets. You have guys like Schellenberger and Robert Bryce who are not in favor of competitive energy markets. They want what amounts to basically nuclear socialism. Right? They want state-funded projects. They want public-private partnerships. They want the government involved heavily in these areas. There are one of the most positive things that's going on now is you see Google and Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera, who are wanting to do these private nuclear, installations for their own, to power their own businesses. So figuring out how to do private competitive nuclear, I think, is a really important thing that we need to think about. And it's happening. There are people who want to do it, and we need to enable them. Travis Fisher at Cato has got some very good ideas about how to speed up permitting for these companies that are putting in power plants that are not connected to the grid, that are basically powering their own industries. These should have a fast-tracked permitting process. I think his ideas are very good in this respect and deserve looking at. But, a lot of people say public-private partnerships are, essential for nuclear. Well, let me just tell you about public-private partnership nightmare that I know of. One of our co-funders of a think tank in Poland is Michael Sololov, who's the richest man in Poland. He has, factories for, tires, chemicals, etc. He also has a deal with GE Hitachi for, exclusive rights in 10 European countries, including Poland. He wanted to start in Poland, powering his own plants, eventually selling power to the grid, eventually developing small modular nuclear reactors in Europe. The Polish government said, "Oh no, you can't do this on your own. This is a national security issue. We must be involved. We insist you do this as a public-private partnership." So he said, "I don't want to do it." Okay, all right. And he gets into a public-private partnership. The government falls. There's a new administration. Donald Tusk comes in. The new administration wants nothing to do with the project started by the previous administration. So they accuse Mr. Sololov of corruption and bribing officials in order to get a public-private partnership with the government. And essentially his project is at a standstill because of a change in government and politics. So this is one of the reasons why public-private partnerships are a terrible idea.
Thank you for that, Rod. I promise you all a little bit of time to ask questions, so we'll go ahead and pass around a mic, and should you have any, I'd love to receive them and moderate your questions.
Yeah, Frank Laukien. One of my jobs is that I'm the founder of a fusion company, Gauss Fusion, in Munich. What is your view of next generation nuclear fusion for the second half of the century, and how can free market solutions help in still the very considerable development that needs to occur there?
So I'll just chime in. I have a solar company. One of my board members is actually helping raise money for Commonwealth Fusion, and so my view is actually pretty optimistic. I was with the founder and CEO of Commonwealth not long ago in Aspen. I think they're going to finally overcome the joke that fusion's always a 10-year away proposition. It sounds like it's actually much sooner than we think. And when you look at the amount of capital that's being invested, the billions of dollars, it looks quite possible. I think that, to me, the other thing is I have no doubt the technology will get there. The more optimistic thing is when you look at the regulatory framework, fusion is completely different from a regulatory standpoint than fission, right? Completely different. So, I think there's a real opportunity there where fusion, if the technology can truly scale quickly, that hopefully the government will not get in the way and try to, muck things up.
Hi. I have a question. Just want to put in a plug for Tokamak Energy too, because some of the technology used in fusion can also be used in many other commercial applications, especially military, propulsion, and other energy uses, medicine. But speaking to Rod's point about one administration canceling the other, we've had a couple back and forths with this change in administration. What are you seeing that can have a more durable solution so that people aren't confused and our allies don't know which way we're going to come from every 4 years?
It's a really good question. I mean, it is a really difficult question because I'm going to Italy to speak at Parliament tonight, and they were already asking me that before I came over. We have zero reliability on the United States that we feel because we have no idea how what the marketplace is going to look like. The UK feels like that. Australia feels like that. All of our allies feel like that. Canada feels like that. I was there last week too, and there's this real sense of like not like there's no confidence in America and its ability to move forward on this stuff, and we have to get that right. And that's why I think really, and I know this sounds really basic, but this issue of energy and the environment has got to get out of the culture wars in America, because it's way too important for that. We get the same sort of emotional response on the environment and energy as we get on abortion. Like it's actually bonkers how divisive this issue has become. And the problem with that is that you just basically spend every 4 years undoing what the other side did instead of moving the country forward. And China loves that for us. Russia loves that for us. They think it's amazing, and they would prefer that, actually. So we need to step up and say, okay, where are the areas that we actually agree on? And how do we actually put and that's where Trump, I would say I'm worried, but I'm also optimistic. He has an opportunity to say, okay, we don't like some of the stuff that the other side's done, but here's what we want to do that we actually could work across the aisle on. We agree on the importance of nuclear right now. We agree on the importance of geothermal. We agree on the importance of investing in our natural ecosystems, sustainable agriculture, supporting our farmers. I mean, there's a lot that we actually agree on. Let's put forward a positive, forward-looking policy on this to create some consistency, because in the past we used to do that. And like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, you know, they're outdated now, but they worked at the time. They had decades of runway because they were passed in a very bipartisan way. There wasn't a risk of undoing those things. We need to create a new era of energy environmental leadership that is not at risk of being undone. And that is only going to happen in a bipartisan way.
You know, let me also say that in terms of long-term durability, you know, the conservative philanthropic community needs to step up in this space. I'm part of that community, but I've been one of the only private foundations that's been, you know, pursuing free market climate policy. These guys have found a few other donors in that space, but everything that we're talking about is very new, and you wouldn't have heard it 10 years ago. I mean, even last year, Jonathan Adler came out with a book called Climate Liberalism, which is all about freaking carbon taxes and cap and trade. You know, so a lot of the mainstream thinking from free market folks is frankly out of date. The whole argument that free economies are clean economies is a fairly new argument that was not really appearing in you know, conservative discourses until recently. This argument and some of the free market policies, the realization that, like it or not, free market policies are good for the environment and good for the climate, and we need more of them because of that, is a message that needs to be better developed and better funded. The ideas behind clean free market climate policy are actually, in my view, in their infancy, and how these things should be applied at the state level, the federal level, the international level, are things that need policy development by the think tank community, which needs to be funded by the philanthropists. So if we want to make this change permanent, if we want to take the climate movement people away from the left and move them over to the free market direction, the free market philanthropic community needs to step up and start funding efforts like these guys.
On that optimistic note for your contributions, we will wrap it up there. Really thank you for, we'll pass the basket around. Really appreciate you participating. Please follow up with these gentlemen and what they're up to. And you know, if there's any follow-up questions, let us know. Really appreciate your time. Let's give a round of applause to this great panel. Thank you.